Hello, and welcome to the Drumwell podcast, where we look at what drummers do away from the kit in order to do their best behind the kit. I'm your host, Todd Hanson. Now, this month, I want to go somewhere a little bit different. As you know, if you're a regular listener, you've heard that most of my episodes I have a guest drummer on, and we discuss various topics, basically based around diet, exercise, warm-ups, overcoming injuries, and that sort of thing, and wherever else the conversation goes. But this month, I thought it might be cool to just explore a couple of functional movements that really helped me personally in my journey. As you may have, if you've listened to the first episode, you may know that I did have a degenerated disc in my spine, which in my L5-S1, which I've actually fixed through a functional movement training schedule. And obviously I do those moves every single day. And I thought, there's been a bit of talk around lately about prehab, which I've sort of looked into a little bit because I think it's quite interesting. Obviously, rehab is what I did for my back with the Functional Movement Training course. But what if we looked at avoiding these injuries altogether? And that's sort of what I want to dive into today. Now, I do want to put a little disclaimer in here because I'm not actually a specialist. So I'm not offering any kind of do this. My advice is not gospel. This is just a talking point and something I'm interested in. So definitely do your own research. And I'd always highly, highly recommend seeing a specialist, be it a physio, an exercise physiologist, a myotherapist, an osteopath, someone that has a bit of actual applied knowledge in that musculoskeletal system. I would highly recommend seeing someone like even a trainer, even a personal trainer, just someone that has applied knowledge. But basically, I just want to talk about my own personal experiences, and it might just get you thinking about things you can do for your own body, which might help with drumming. So the movements I want to talk about, they're really just two very fundamental functional movements. And that is the hip hinge and the sit to stand squat. These are the basic beginning starting points for these movements. Obviously, a hip hinge is sort of the move that you might use if you're swinging a kettlebell, or more commonly known, the deadlift. You do need to hinge at the hips for deadlifts, and actually deadlifting is something that's really helped with my back. So I really wanted to just have a chat about that. Now, I've got a friend who's a myotherapist. He's also a drummer, and at some point he will be on this podcast. His name is Pabs. I go to him quite often he's sort of like a mechanic. A myotherapist, I won't go too far into it because when I have him on, I want him to explain it. But they do all sorts of things with the musculoskeletal system. He even does these crazy little things where he'll test different muscles and limbs and stuff and see if anything is overcompensating. So, for example, last time I saw him, I had a bit of pain in my shoulder. And he did a few tests, and it turned out, there's two muscles under your pec, the pec major and pec minor. Turned out my pec minor on my right side was not activating properly, which meant the pec major was overcompensating, which led to some shoulder pain, which was nowhere even near my pec. But basically, I got some exercises to work that. So I'd activate the pec minor, and I'd do these various exercises, and the shoulder pain is all but gone. And if anything, I've probably got a stronger shoulder as a result, purely because I've worked on it. And what I started to do was do it on both sides, because not that my pec minor on the other side was affected, but I thought, well, if it can happen on one side, it can happen on the other. And then that's sort of taken me down this little rabbit hole of Prehab. So we've all heard of rehab. I mean, I'm not talking like addiction rehab. I'm talking rehab after an injury, which is basically what that functional movement training course that I attended was. If you've listened to episode 1, I talked all about that, which is the way I've actually fixed my back. But I think prehab is an interesting concept, especially how it's evolved. So initially, prehab was sort of spoken about by surgeons. You know, say if you had to get a knee replacement or a hip replacement, what they'd do is they'd get you in and start doing exercises around that, you know, joint or area that was going to be replaced. Say it's a knee, they'll start giving you various exercises around your knee to strengthen the area. So when they put the new knee in, you heal quicker and you can adapt quicker and you can get back to moving quicker. So that's sort of where the prehab, I guess, definition came from. But it's evolved. It's evolved a little bit, especially with sort of, you know, physios and exercise physiologists and stuff like that, where it's if you do something that's like a repetitive movement where you can get RSI, repetitive strain injury, you can actually do these like certain moves to prevent it in the first place. And really, I mean, a lot of the issues that we have in sort of modern medicine, modern treatments, is that we're always treating the symptoms rather than the cause. The great thing about the functional movement training course that I did is that it actually treats the cause, which then reduces the symptoms. And in my case, 2 years on, it's basically all but gone. I get a little bit of back pain from time to time, but it's nothing. It's so much better than it was. And I really put a lot of it down to the hip hinge and the squat. So let's just, I've just done a little bit, I've got a few notes here that I just wanted to share. So let's just talk a little bit about prehab. Prehab is an intentional practice using exercises and techniques to increase overall mobility, facilitate neuromuscular activation, and develop neuromuscular coordination to foster stability. Prehab improves movement quality, enhances performance, and increases longevity, which is what we want to do. We want to be able to move, and we want to be able to play drums for, you know, as long as possible. And given that it is a very, like, to me, your core stability is so important with drumming, because everything kind of revolves around that, especially if you're into, I guess, any drummer really, but especially like extreme drummers, extreme heavy metal drummers who are going really fast with their feet and their hands at the same time. So you're basically just balancing on your butt, and every limb is going for it. And if you're like me and you used to enjoy a windmill, then that's the head going too. So both legs, arms, and the head going, and you're just basically this, you know, you got to have that core stability to keep it all in place. More about prehab. So it's a relatively new idea in sports medicine and therapy. It does ensure the best chance of success, you know, should the athlete, or the drummer in this case, start practicing it before the injury occurs. So when you look at things like repetitive movements, that is what we're talking about. And I think for us, a repetitive movement is that core stability and the balance. And if you're not stable, it can definitely affect you in later life, as it did with my lower back. Now, I'm not saying that all my lower back issue came from just drumming. It was actually probably a whole lifetime of not moving correctly. And, you know, we're humans, we get into our habits, we move certain ways, and that's just that. You know, you might not move correctly. I found a lot of things I did were not correct in the way that I moved, and I basically had to form new habits around it. So Prehab exercise and techniques will mobilize, activate, and stabilize. Now, where I want to go today is I really want to just talk about the hip hinge and the squat. But the basic start for a hip hinge and the basic start for a squat. So if you've never done it before, you don't want to roll into the gym and just throw a bunch of weights on and start doing it. You really want to get your technique down first. And take it from there. And like I said earlier, definitely see a specialist, see a trainer, see a physio, an exercise physiologist, someone that has the knowledge that can actually give you a routine that you can stick to and build upon, and you're gonna do really well. I guarantee it, because it's worked for me. So let's talk about the hip hinge. The hip hinge is an exercise that basically targets the posterior chain, which is basically, that goes from that the point in the middle of your shoulder blades right down to the back of your knees. That's your posterior chain. I guess the word posture comes from posterior. Now, the muscles that make up the posterior chain include the glutes, hamstrings, and the low back. And a hip hinge will also rely on your core abdominal muscles. So you're really using your core, which is basically, the torso area where we balance everything from. You're really using that and activating all of that with a hip hinge. So biggest thing, you really want to keep a neutral spine. And you want to have your toes pointing forwards, like straight forwards. And you want to be about just beyond shoulder width, about hip width apart, maybe about shoulder width apart. And then you basically just push your butt back as far as you can. So when you hinge at the hips, your spine stays neutral and the bend occurs right at your hips. If your lower back is doing the hinging or bending, this will cause pain and reduce the range of motion of the movement. So, learning how to properly hip hinge is a skill, and it will take you some time. The way I learnt to do it properly, and in hindsight, perhaps because I was doing deadlifting and kettlebell swinging, and I hadn't really been trained correctly and had someone sort of critiquing my form, so to speak. The way I learnt to do it was with a broomstick or a piece of dowel, basically a broomstick with no broom head on it. And what you want to do, you want to have the piece of dowel vertically on your back. So you have grasp one end with your right hand, have it in the natural curve of you. So this is the best way I can describe it. You want the broomstick to touch the bit that sticks out at the back of your head, the top of your spine, your spine's almost like an S shape, not quite an S shape, but it's kind of an S shape. So the top of the spine between the shoulders there, you want the broomstick touching there, and you also want it to be touching your tailbone. So those 3 points, tailbone, top of the spine between the shoulder blades, and the little bumpy bit at the back of your head. And you want those all touching the broomstick, and that means that your spine is in a neutral position, which is very important. So once you've got the broomstick touching the back of your head, your upper back, and your tailbone, you shift your weight to your heels and push your hips back towards the wall behind you while hinging forward at the hips. So think about sticking your butt back as far as you can, and as you hinge, the broomstick should not lose contact with any of those 3 points. If it does, then your spine's out of neutral and you're not doing the move correctly. So once you've pushed your butt back, you want to lower your torso until it's midway between vertical and parallel to the floor. Then you do a little pause, keep a slight bend in your knees, But you actually also want from your knees down, you want those parts of your lower legs to be straight. So, yep, keep a slight bend in your knees during the downward and upward phase. And when you're coming back up, you want to contract your glutes and push your hips forward and upward to return to the starting position. Now, I will put some links in the show notes of just some videos so you can actually watch these if you want to try it. Again, as I've said already, I would recommend booking in a session with a specialist just to get your form correct. And then you can build upon it from there. Now, let's talk benefits. These are the benefits of hip hinging. Increase flexibility and mobility. It can reduce tightness in your hamstrings and improve stability and range of motion in your hips. You'll have improved posture. Oh, excuse me. Improved posture. It can, tight hamstrings can pull on your pelvis and cause your natural posture to shift. Keeping your hamstrings loose can help you maintain a comfortable sitting and standing position throughout your day. So, next would be better lower body strength, because the hip hinge targets your posterior chain. And like I said, that refers to the muscles on the back of your body, which include your butt, your hamstrings, and your back. But yeah, basically the posterior chain is from that part between your shoulder blades right down to the back of your knees. So by doing these hip hinges, this will lead to less back pain because you're keeping your spine neutral, you're hinging at the hips, you're working your core, and it's promoting less strain on your spine because you're not moving in an awkward position. So, for example, like a daily activity that I had to change, which now I always hip hinge for, is loading the dishwasher. So I will have my feet, I'll have my toes pointing forward, and it just becomes habit. You do it constantly, and it just becomes habit. So I'll have my toes pointing forward. I will position myself in a manner where I am hinging at the hips to bend down and reach the dishwasher to load it. So, a couple of the other areas that we hit here, the muscles that it works in the hip hinge. The glutes, obviously, that's your butt. They play a really significant role in extending the hip joint and maintaining stability. Strong glutes allow you to do things like getting up from a chair, playing drums, climbing stairs. It also works your quads, which is located on the front of your thighs. It works the hamstrings, which is located at the back of your thighs. Now, obviously, your legs, very important for walking, running, climbing, and, of course, for us, playing drums. The really important part that I found with the hip hinge, and the area that I needed to strengthen most for my L5-S1 degenerated disc, was the erector spinae, which are the muscles in your back that run along either side of your spine. Now, they're involved in back extension, rotation, and stabilization, and strong back muscles can reduce low back pain. Now, also the transverse abdominis. This is an abdominal muscle. It lies deep within your lower belly, and it's a stabilizer. Basically, you've got, from what I understand, you've got 3 stabilizers in your stomach, deep in your stomach, and you've got 2 in your back, which is always why I'm not sure if any of you do sort of physical jobs, but obviously lifting drums up and down stairs, loading in and out of venues, that's pretty physical. So I was always taught to tense my abs when I lifted things, which I have always done. But obviously, I may not have done it super correct all the time because I ended up with that degeneration in my disc. Also, a lot of the time with degenerated discs, I might add, from what I was told by my neurosurgeon, Dr. Johnson, who I have mentioned before, is that sometimes that's just comes with age. So you may not have done anything wrong, but as far as movement, but just age, it just your body starts to break down. But I sort of feel like if I'd have known all this when I was in my 20s, before I really got into warming up and exercising and trying to look after my body more, I think I probably would have actually tried to do it in order to avoid injuries in later life. So, young drummers, this could be helpful for you. And obviously us older guys alike, because we want to continue, we want some longevity in this, because we do it because we love it. So, that's just kind of my view on it. So there's other variations of a hip hinge. You can use a wall. So basically, you stand in front of a wall, and you basically want to. You sort of want to be a few inches away from it, or 10 centimeters away from it. But you want to touch your bum to the wall. So you want to just push your butt out as far as you can, making sure to keep a neutral spine and a flat back. As you do this, you can sort of keep stepping out further from the wall until you're getting, that real sort of fold happening. I really highly recommend using the broomstick, though. I found that just made me know how it feels to do a hip hinge, so that I knew how my body felt with a neutral spine, so that when I did get rid of the broomstick to do, say, a banded hinge or deadlift or even kettlebell swings, I actually knew where my spine felt neutral purely by repetitive, doing that movement with the broomstick so often. Now, as I just said, adding a kettlebell. Now, you can actually, instead of just getting straight into kettlebell swings, because that's a whole different ball game, you really want to get that right too. It's a great exercise, but you do want to get it right, because you can cause injury if you do anything incorrectly. So once again, I would highly recommend. I actually used to go to a kettlebell school in Brisbane called Queensland Kettlebells, and I learnt quite a bit about hip hinging and how to swing kettlebells correctly. And this was all expanded upon when I went to the Functional Movement Training Centre to fix my back. But you don't just want to start with a heavy kettlebell. You want to get used to it. A good one that I actually learnt was holding the kettlebell, I guess, by the horns, the handle bit, holding that and pushing it sort of into your pelvis, I guess, just under your belly button, sort of at the top of your hips, and then you've got the weight there and doing a hip hinge like that. So you're not actually swinging it, you're just holding it and using a little bit of weight. Now, all of this eventually you can upgrade to a deadlift, which is, you do your hip hinge. Once you're comfortable with the hip hinge movement, you can start doing deadlifts, because you'll know where your spine is neutral. You're going to have the straight lower legs, so your shins should be straight up and down, toes pointing straight ahead, feet about shoulder width apart. And, start light, get heavier, that sort of thing. But again, talk to someone, get a trainer, get someone to watch your form. Even film your form in the mirror and watch it and critique it and try and get it better, because it's really all about form and doing these moves correctly. There's obviously a few mistakes with deadlifts and hip hinging. the biggest mistake, most common mistake is sort of bending your knees too far, which basically becomes a squat. We're not trying to squat here. We're trying to keep a neutral spine and push our bum back and hinge at our hips. So we're basically folding ourselves in half at the hips. A couple of other mistakes is not engaging your core muscles. So with the movement, you want to be engaging your core muscles. So flexing your abs, flexing your glutes. Obviously, you need to be able to move. You don't want to be so tense that you can't move. But you want to move down slowly through the movement. Your abs should be flexing as you're going down. And then as you come up, you want to tighten your glutes and you want to flex those up. And that sort of will finish the movement. Now, using the lower back to hinge, that's also a common mistake, where you bend at the back instead of at your hips. That's gonna cause injury. So if you're getting any kind of back pain, you're not doing it correctly. So I would definitely, as I say, film yourself, or at least or get a trainer or something. So you want someone with a bit of knowledge, or even YouTube, whatever. You want to watch it and you want to make sure you're doing it the same. And also the other common mistake when we're talking hip hinging with a broomstick is losing contact with the broomstick. So those 3 points I said earlier, the back of your head, the middle of your spine, and the lower part, your tailbone, they all need to be touching the whole way through the movement. So if you'll feel it if it's moving off or even slightly moving off. You want to make sure those 3 points remain constant. Safety and precautions. If you feel any back pain, stop what you're doing. Just means you need to modify it or decrease how far you go. You might not be able to bend that far straight away. But yeah, the broomstick is a really great tool. It does help you maintain a neutral spine. And that's really where we want to go. Now, just let me have a look through my notes here. That's the hip hinge. So for me, that's just been such a really, really great movement. I swear by it. I use it. I do it every single day. Every morning, the first thing I do, I wake up, I grab my broomstick, and I do hip hinges. I do another one called passovers, but we're not going to discuss that today. That's more for the upper frame, the shoulders and stuff. But I do hip hinges, then I do passovers, then I do more hip hinges. And then for my daily exercise routine, for my warm-ups, I do banded hip hinges, which is with a stretchy band, an exercise band, fitness band, whatever you want to call it. And I always do some form of deadlift in my workout. Whether it be kettlebell deadlifts, whether it be Romanian deadlifts, that's the one where you actually start, you pick the weight up at your hips, and you start at your hips and you lower it down. You push your butt back, you lower it down. You want to keep the bar in the same, it's got to go straight up and down. You should be able to draw a straight line if you stuck a pencil on the end of your barbell, you should be able to draw a straight line down a piece of paper the way you're hinging. And then obviously the traditional deadlift off the floor. But so those are a few little things with the hip hinge. Now, squats. The way I've done squats for years. I've always thought they've been really good. They're really good for glutes, pelvic floor, for your legs, obviously, and once again for your core. They are very good for your core. Core is something that's so important for us as drummers, and I think that if everyone really got into developing their core, there would be probably no back injuries in drumming. That's just my opinion. So let's talk about this. The sit to stand squat. So it's basically just doing squats onto a chair. So you're sitting on a chair, but you want to be conscious of it. You don't just want to sort of flop into the chair and flop out of the chair, if you can flop out of a chair. But it's actually just as simple as sitting down and standing up into a chair, just with a few, just taking a bit of care with the movements. So it's really just a few specific cues that will strengthen glutes, quadriceps, and just improve that sort of lower chain stability and balance. So you begin by sitting toward the front of any chair. I would say your best bet is sort of like a dinner table chair, because you kind of want your legs to be on a bit of a 90-degree angle. If you're just sitting up straight in the chair, you want to have that 90-degree angle. You don't want to be sitting in a lounge chair, like a couch, where your knees are higher than your hips. You want to have your knees about at the sort of neutral height as your hips. So you move towards the front of the chair. And like I say, like a dinner table chair with a firm surface. You position your feet flat on the ground, shoulder width apart, and slightly behind your knees. So you basically want your knees over your toes with a squat movement. And the way I was taught was that you have your toes sort of slightly facing outwards. So not straight ahead, just a slight rotation of each foot, so your toes are facing outwards. Now, as you go to get up, you want to lean your body forward. You want to aim to have your nose over your toes and focus on squeezing your glutes as you stand up. Then you stand up all the way, straightening your hips and spine completely before sitting back down again. The descent is essentially the reverse order of the standing, but the key reminders are you don't want to plop. So you don't just want to plop down into the chair. You want to do a fairly slow movement, slow and precise, with a lot of control. So when you're lowering yourself down, you want to lower yourself with control to strengthen your leg muscles and improve the mind-muscle connection. This is what I was talking about earlier, just basically creating those habits and being very conscious of the way you're moving and how it's working. Like, think of your body as like a mechanism. That's sort of what you want to. That's sort of how you want to approach it. Your body is mechanical. It moves. There's axes and all that sort of stuff. So you sort of want to think of it like that. Plopping doesn't work any of the muscles. That just increases your chances of injuring yourself. So once you lower yourself back into the chair, then you do it again. If you're going to do reps, all you want to start from a sitting position. And if you're going to do reps, you want to be very careful. Take it slow. You don't want to rush it. And you want to stand, and then as you sit, as soon as your bum just touches the chair, stand back up again. So that's when you sort of snap back up, squeezing all those muscles, all those posterior chain muscles, the glutes, the legs, the quads. The sit to stand squat. So that's a really basic intro into squatting. I have found personally, once again, I've found personally that these two movements have done absolute wonders for my body and for my drumming and my core stability and also just my day-to-day life. And by creating the habit of the hinging and the squatting and doing it correctly, I use it in everyday life. Like I said, loading the dishwasher, picking up a parcel, moving furniture around. I'll squat and I'll lift with my legs and my knees, and I'll squeeze my core. So I'll squeeze my abs and glutes. And yeah, I've really, really made that a habit, and it works. I'm only telling you this because it works, and I think it's a couple of really important movements for us as drummers. Now, obviously, once you get better at doing that, if you've never squatted before, this is a good start. Sitting to stand, everyone should have a chair. And then you can add weights. And there's so many variations on squats as well. Front squats, back squats, kettlebell squats, goblet squats. The sky's the limit. Plenty of different options. Anyway, those are the two moves that I wanted to talk about. I do intend to have some specialists on. Like I said, my mate Pabs, the myotherapist, he's going to come on and not only is he a fantastic drummer, but he was a concreter and his back was shot, and he fixed it with a lot of these movements. He actually told me a long time ago, a mutual friend of ours was having some back problems, and he said he was getting frustrated because he goes, all he's got to do is deadlifts and squats and he'll fix his back. But you can't make someone do it. They have to want to do it. So I just thought I'd share this today just to see if I could get you thinking. If you like this kind of an episode, I'd love to do more like this, just sharing my own experiences and what I do. Because, like I say, I do it every single day. And part of my warm-up to play drums now, I always carry stretchy exercise bands, and I'm always doing like resisted squats and resisted hip hinges with those as part of my warm-up. Before I even pick up a set of sticks, I'm doing those to get everything sort of lubed up and ready to play, and have all those core muscles engaged and ready to basically balance me while my limbs do everything else. Anyway, I hope this has been informative for you. Please leave a comment or give me some feedback if you like this kind of episode, or maybe you'd rather just listen to me interviewing other people. But I think I'm going to do a few more like this, and I'm also going to have specialists on. Not only my myotherapist, I might get my osteo, I might get my acupuncturist, I might even talk to a masseuse, I might talk to all the specialists that I use, because, hey, it's my podcast. Anyway, I hope this has been informative. Leave a comment, leave a review, always open to feedback, and most importantly, thank you for listening. I really appreciate you. Take care, and I will chat to you again next month. Bye-bye.